Hello, this is Pastor Carolyn, and I am so glad you're joining me. We are starting a new series this summer called Visiting the Old Testament Stories of Our Bible School Days. If you are like most folks, Bible school has had to take a back seat this summer, and I'm missing that. So I thought I would visit some of the Old Testament stories that seem to be popular in Bible school and see what God can teach us during this time. So join me for a few weeks as we delve into some of our favorite Old Testament stories. If you have one you would like us to look at, please message me. I would love to look at some of your favorite stories. We're going to start out with David and Goliath. When the Philistines continually harassed, it seems, the Israelites, they often ended up in battle. And one of the more tragic battles was when the Philistines actually won and took the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites. And if you remember that story, when they took the Ark of the Covenant, all kinds of bad things started happening to them, and they decided that it was because they had taken the Ark of the Covenant, and they actually sent it back. But this time, here they are drawn up for battle, and Saul is the king. He's a big old guy. He tallest in the land. Part of the reason he was maybe chosen by king for a king, he was over 6 feet tall, we think. And then they were on one side, and on the other side were the Philistines. And this time, the Philistines had a secret weapon. They had Goliath, and it said he was a giant. And it looks like he might have been as much as 9 feet 5 inches tall. And he would come out every day and say, "Send out your best man, and whoever wins this battle, then we will say they've won the whole thing. And if we lose," Goliath says, "then we'll be your servants. And if you lose, then you'll have to be our servants." And he would come out and taunt the Israelites every day. "Don't you have somebody that can come fight me?" And nobody on the Israelite side was volunteering for that job. Jesse's had several sons, and 3 of them were at that battlefield. And Jesse sent his youngest son, David, to check on them. And he wanted to know how they were doing. And he sent different things with David, some grain, 5-gallon bucket of grain, and he sent cheeses for the commanding officers and other supplies. And he wanted David to deliver those and let him know, how they were doing. So when David gets there, his brothers were not thrilled to see him. You know how it is with younger brothers. And they told him, "You're just here to see what's going on. You don't even belong around here." But David soon found out about Goliath. And he thought, "Well, I could take him. I'll take him." And he goes to the king and he says, "Don't worry about this. I will fight the giant Goliath and I will win, because God has given me many battles as I've watched the sheep in the wilderness, and I've killed a lion and a bear, all with my slingshot, and I know I can take down this giant." Well, Saul was very reluctant because David was quite young. They think maybe 22 or so. And he wasn't too convinced that David could do it, but there wasn't anybody else. So finally Saul said, okay, here, let me give you my armor and my sword. And David put all this on, and it was so heavy. That armor probably weighed 50 pounds or more, and the sword was real heavy too. So David said, no, I can't wear this. This is not going to help me at all. And so he took off all that armor and just went and to the front of the line. And when Goliath made up his call, who will fight me? David said he would fight him. And Goliath thought it was a joke because David was not very tall and slight in build, and he's really laughing. But David took his slingshot, which was not a toy. He used it to fight off wild animals in the wilderness, and he picked up 5 stones and he headed toward Goliath. And as Goliath is taunting him and coming at him, David takes one of those stones and shoots it and hits Goliath right in the head. And it was such a strong shot right in the middle of his head that it actually knocked him over, knocked him out. And David runs forth and grabs Goliath's sword and cuts Goliath's head off. And there was great rejoicing all around. And of course, the Philistines fled the area. So this is quite a story. David and Goliath, and David and the slingshot. And I mentioned Bible school. I remember having this story in Bible school one year at Bethel United Methodist Church in the Oxford, North Carolina area. And we had a cardboard Goliath set up, and the kids would come up and try to throw paper wads through the hole we'd put in Goliath's head. It was great fun. Does this story have anything to teach us? What is God trying to tell us today with this David and Goliath story? Well, I think it's that we all have giants that come to plague us once in a while, that taunt us, that seem like insurmountable problems. And we can learn how David managed. And maybe that will help us, that God has given us this story so that we can defeat the giants in our life. First of all, David plugged into the source of power. He didn't come up there saying, I can do anything, just let me at him. He said God had delivered him from the lion and the bear, and that God would protect him now, and that he would defeat the giant so that God's name could be glorified. So David, picked up these 5 stones, and we can even name them. We can say one of them is remembering what God has done for us in the past. Looking at David's story, he was remembering that God had helped him in the past fight off the wild animals in the wilderness as he watched the sheep. And then another important thing that we can use is prayer. Maybe one of those stones represented prayer. That keeping in touch with God on a daily basis, maybe when things are going good, that we can then easily turn to Him when things have gone bad for us. That prayer is really important. We give David credit for writing some of the Psalms, and there's great prayers in the Psalms. When we can't think of our own words, pick up the book of Psalms and read. Also, David had a priority. So we can say one of those stones represented priority, that he wanted to glorify God in all that he did. He wanted to give God the credit. He wanted God to shine forth in that battle. So we can take any problem that we have and show God's power. If we're sick, we can show God's healing grace. If we are hurting, we can show God's healing power. And then maybe a fourth stone represented passion, that you have to really face these problems. You have to go at it with energy and belief, and you have to know what you're doing. You know, it said that David ran toward that giant once the battle was on. And then maybe the last one was persistence, and maybe that's why David picked up 5 stones. He didn't know how everything was going to turn out, but he was prepared. He kept at it. He wanted to keep going. He wasn't going to quit. And if that first rock hadn't done it, he would have put another one in. He would have kept using his slingshot. We need to keep our eyes on focus about what we're doing and not let that giant taunt us, whatever the problem is. We need to focus on God and tell God our problems and let God lead us in how we are to act. And you know, at the very end of it all, David cut off the giant's head to give no chance for Goliath to pop up again. And that's what we need to do with some of our problems, some of our issues. Get rid of it. Don't let it linger and come back into our lives. So let's look at this plan of David's and see if we can figure out maybe some of the problems that we might have or someone we love might have. One of the things is addictions, whether it's alcohol or prescription drugs. It's a huge problem. And if we have that in our lives, how do we go about solving that? Well, we plug into the power. We let God know that we're hurting, that we need His power, that we know that God can help us conquer anything. We have to really remember how God has helped us in the past, how God has helped us have victory over all kinds of problems, and that addiction, as hard as that is, God can see us through that. We remember everything God has done for us, and we call on God's name. And especially prayer, to understand that this continual ability to plug in to God's grace, God's power, God's might, God's will for our life, that we have to have prayer in our life to do that. And it's a powerful, powerful weapon. It has to be a priority. If we have an addiction, you know, there's so many groups out there, AA and other groups that can help us through those times. We have to go to those meetings. We have to be under medical care. We have to make it important in our life. The passion that we have, do we really want it? Are we willing to sacrifice? Are we willing to do what God tells us to do? And we have to keep at it, even if we fail, even if we slide back. We We have to be like David. We have to be persistent to face the giant of addiction or any giant in our life. We have to focus on God and make this the important thing it is. The giant's trying to get us, and we need to get rid of that giant. And then the final step there was cutting off the enemy's head. And so once we get into treatment, and once we get into understanding about addiction, and once we start on that path of recovery, we know we've got to stay totally away from the drug or the alcohol. We can't keep it around. We might have to let go some friends. We have to cut off that enemy's head and stay focused on what we're all about. There's so many issues that we're all facing during this time. Our health, depression, money problems, temptations of all kinds. Well, let's do one more. How about if we have a problem with anger, and we find that we blow off steam and hurt other people all the time? We may get over it, but we leave a lot of damage in our wake. How are we going to do that? Well, once again, we plug into the source of power and we talk to God about it. We admit what is going on in our life, and we understand that God has been here for us through all our life. We can see it in other people's lives. We've seen it work in the past. And we go to God in prayer. And we know we have to confess any problems that we have. And we come to God and we ask God to help us with this anger. And we make it a priority. We have to think about it. We have to understand what it is that's making us angry. And when that happens, we have to turn. We have to go another way. We might need to get into counseling. We need to make it important in our life. It has to be a passion. It has to be something that we're saying, God, you've helped me. I need to get rid of this once and for all. And we keep it in our minds. And when we mess up, we go right back. We're persistent. We care about these things. We keep God as our focus. We're just like David. We know that God can help us, that it will be God that will have the glory for anything that we can overcome. And like with the other problems that we might have in our life, we've got to cut off the head. We don't do things that we know that are going to get us agitated. If we get aggravated and angry and are awful in traffic, we learn that we got to leave earlier, that we might have to find a different route, that we have to understand it's going to take us a while to get there, that other drivers are going to aggravate us. There's things that we can do. God has given us this mighty story, David and Goliath. And so the next time we face a giant, we know what to do. We plug into the power. We choose the right weapons that God has given us. Prayer and persistence. We know that we keep our eyes on God, that we have the right focus, that we seize the moment that God has given us by giving us this reality, and that we cut off that enemy's head, that we turn to God, that we know that God loves us, that God wants victory for us, and that if we are in God's will, that God will help us, whatever our problems might be. So this is our first Bible school story of the summer, David and Goliath. I hope you will read about David and Goliath and that you will take up the problems that are the giants in your life and know that God will give you the victory. God bless you this day.